your photos ever feel flat and lifeless?
Oh my god. With one simple Lightroom tool called contrast, you can make your photos pop with color, depth, and mood. Contrast controls the difference between light and dark. It is the foundation of photo editing. My name is Edward, and I'm your friendly photographer's guide to the Pacific Northwest. Today we are covering the basic tool in Lightroom, contrast. Basically, the contrast slider in Lightroom makes darks darker and brights brighter at the same time. If you increase contrast, the photo looks more dramatic. Shadows get deeper, highlights pop, and everything feels punchier. If you decrease contrast, the photo looks softer and more faded. Lights and darker get closer together, almost like a haze or a vintage look. Basically, it controls how much separation there is between light and dark in your image. Let's look at a few examples. All right, so we're sitting here in Lightroom and I pulled up an image of the sunset. Obviously, super beautiful, lots of colors. There's a lot of things that you can do in Lightroom to make this photo pop even harder. Right off the bat, you can see a lot of different things going on. You can see the sun illuminating the scene. You got the dark waves, and also you got the sky that really creates this impact in this image. So right over here on the right side, there's this basic tool called contrast. It really makes the difference between the light and the darks in your photograph. So over here, we can go ahead and push it over to the right, and you can instantly see that the dark in the image is getting darker and the lights in the image are getting brighter. So you got to play around with it a little bit. So if we just analyze this image, we can see that it's already pretty contrasted. Again, like you got that bright sun compared to the really dark sand and water. In this photograph, what would really help is if you decrease contrast, because right off the bat, it's pretty contrasted to begin with. So let's go ahead and move that slider to the left. So as you move it to the left, it becomes more of a soft image, which is what we want for this photo. It really depends on what kind of vibe that you want your photos to be. I think in this photograph, I really like the warm sunset and that hazy glow of the sun. So I put the contrast to -46 to kind of give that cohesive look. So when you're decreasing contrast, you're eliminating the difference between the brights and the darks. Let's go ahead and take a look at another example. All right, so I got this really cool photo of the Golden Gate Bridge. You can see the different elements that play into the image. So you got this giant orange looking bridge, and then you got these cool colors of the purple haze that is going on, and you can see the reflections in the water. So if you really want a cinematic epic shot, what you can do in this photograph is to increase the contrast to give it more of a emotional weight and that difference between the light and the dark to really make it stand out. So let's go ahead and punch it up just a little bit. Let's go +25 here. And you can see that the darks are darker, the brightness of the bridge and the reflection gets brighter, really creating those different elements in the photograph to make it more punchier. So let's try to go for a more warm look or a more welcoming look by decreasing the contrast to -25 to see what the vibe of the image would look like. So let's go ahead and move that right now. So as I'm moving it down to -25, around there, you can tell that like it's a much more cohesive picture where the darks and the rocks are really blending in with the brights of the bridge. So this is what you're trying to go for in your images. Contrast is a really good tool to be able to fit the theme or what you want out of the photo. Personally, in this photo, I really want the bridge to really stand out from the rocks and from its surroundings. So if we punch up the contrast somewhere to like +40, boom, right off the bat, the elements in the image really start to separate. The darkness of the rocks underneath are more darker, and the brightness of the bridge really tones it up, creating layers in your image to create more of that cinematic look. All right, so for this last example, we're going to take a look at this photo that I took in San Francisco, and it features a bunch of birds that are flying in unison over the water. And you can already tell that they are separate from the white backgrounds. But again, I really want to go for that cinematic look. So I'm going to play around with the contrast tool to really make the dark in the birds a lot more apparent by bumping up the contrast. So that way it stands out a little bit more from the white background. So let's go ahead and experiment and give it a +40 here to see what that looks like. So as we punch it up to about +40, boom, you could already see how much of a difference it is when you punch up that contrast. The birds are a lot darker and they stand out from that white background. So if you really want to like highlight a specific element of your photograph, here I really want to highlight the birds. By increasing the contrast, you could really make a difference in the photo. So let's go back. So here's 0, and we really punch it up, and you could see, if we can even punch it up even higher, let's put it up to 100, right? So now when you look at the birds, man, they're like really standing out from the white background. And if that's something that you want to do, that's perfectly fine. But let's look at the inverse of the image if we downsize the contrast. So now as we downsize the contrast, the birds are slowly starting to melt into the background, and it creates that cohesiveness and it doesn't stand out as much. So if that's something that you want to do with your image, to have it cohesive, decreasing contrast is a good way of doing that. But my plan for this is I want to make sure that these birds stand out. So by increasing contrast, you could really see the details and the darkness and the contrast between the birds and the white background to really stand out here. So that is basically the key of contrast, is to really emphasize the difference between light and dark to make it a really interesting image. For the most part, in most general images, bumping up the contrast even by a little bit creates that difference. So the key thing to learn here with contrast is that when you have something really dark in front of something really white, when you bump up that contrast like we do here, you could really see how much of a difference it is between the two layers that you have going on. Like these birds, if you zoom in, if we bring it back to 0, you can see that the colors of the bird and the waves underneath, they're kind of the same. And if you want to make it stand out, really giving it as much contrast as you can to really have the birds come out and pop out. And that's the visual element that I'm trying to go for here, is to increase the contrast between, the white soft background and the details of the bird. So contrast is a really good tool to use to highlight the difference between, the dark side of the birds versus the really foggy white background of the fog. So that's contrast. Super awesome tool to use in Lightroom. This is just a little quick example of what contrast does to images in Lightroom. Up here on this corner is a link to a playlist covering other basic tools to level up your photography game. Consider subscribing to this channel for more content about Lightroom editing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.